In a land carved by wind and unforgiving sun, a woman of immense wealth lived a life of profound silence, the sole heir to an empire of dust and cattle. And in the shadows of her sprawling ranch house, a man of quiet strength carried the weight of a past that was not his own, guarding a secret that kept him chained to the fringes of the world. She had everything but peace, he had nothing but his honor. Their two worlds, separated by fortune and sorrow, were destined to collide, not in a clash of thunder, but in a whisper of discovery, a single moment that would prove that the deepest truths are not found in what is owned, but in what is protected. What happens when a lonely heart follows a trail of quiet desperation? What she discovered would not just change her life, but redeem a soul she never knew was lost. We love sharing these inspirational stories with you. Before we begin, we'd love to know where you're watching from today. Let us know in the comments, and please remember to subscribe to our channel for more special stories like this one. Your support means the world to us. Elara Vance was the proprietor of the vast, sprawling Arrowhead Ranch, a kingdom of golden plains and distant, purple mountains she had inherited but never truly possessed. The land was in her name, the grand, timbered ranch house was her home, but her heart remained a tenant within its walls, unsettled and lonely. Her father, a man larger than the sky he'd lived under, had been gone a year, his passing sudden and cloaked in the kind of whispers that clung to a place like frost in shadow. Since then, Elara had moved through her days like a ghost in her own life, the weight of the ranch, its ledgers, its thirsty cattle, its silent, watchful hands, a constant pressure on her shoulders. She wore her wealth not like a crown, but like a shield, one that kept the world at a distance. Her conversations were with her cattle boss about dwindling water supplies, and with her cook about menus she had no appetite for. There was a quiet order to her life, but no joy. Into this silent world moved Anna, a slip of a girl, barely 18, hired for housekeeping. She was quiet, almost invisible, with eyes that held a sorrow too old for her years. She moved through the great house with a dancer's grace, her hands always busy, her voice a rare and gentle murmur. But Elara, a woman attuned to the subtleties of a herd, noticed things. She saw the tremor in Anna's hand as she cleared away a platter of uneaten bread. She saw the way the girl's gaze would linger on the pantry door, a flicker of raw, desperate hunger in her eyes. It wasn't theft Elara suspected, it was something deeper, a need so profound it seemed to ache in the very air around the girl. One sweltering afternoon, after Anna had finished her duties, Elara watched from the veranda as the girl left, not towards the main road, but on a faint, dusty track that wound its way into the scrubland bordering the Arrowhead property. It was a path to nowhere, or so Elara had always thought. Curiosity, a feeling long dormant, stirred within her. She pulled on her riding boots, saddled her mare, and followed, keeping a respectful distance, the setting sun casting her long shadow ahead. The track was rougher than it looked, winding through mesquite and sun-bleached rock. It led to a small, forgotten parcel of land, wedged between two stony mesas, a place the deed maps called simply the Hollow. There, tucked into the earth as if hiding from the world, stood a small, dilapidated cabin. A curl of smoke, thin and pale, rose from its stone chimney. Elara dismounted, tying her mare to a weathered post. She could hear the faint sound of children's voices, not joyful, but hushed and anxious. She crept closer, her boots silent in the soft dust, and peered through the grimy pane of a single window. The sight within stole the air from her lungs. Anna was on her knees, breaking apart the leftover bread rolls she had carefully wrapped in her apron. Two small children, a boy and a girl no older than 6 or 7, watched her with wide, solemn eyes, taking the small pieces she offered with a gravity that broke Elara's heart. There was no butter, no milk, just dry bread, and they ate it as if it were a feast. The room was nearly bare, a rough-hewn table, 2 cots, a threadbare blanket. It was a home stripped down to the bones of survival. Suddenly, the cabin door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, built with the stark, powerful lines of the mesas that surrounded them. His face was all angles and shadows in the fading light, his expression a mask of weary resolve. He didn't see Elara. He looked toward the horizon, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. It was Silas. Silas Kane. Elara knew the name. It was a name spoken in hushed tones around town, a name synonymous with trouble, with a past stained by accusation. He had been accused of rustling cattle from a neighboring ranch years ago. The charges were dropped for lack of proof, but the suspicion remained, a permanent brand on his reputation. Seeing him now, standing guard over this tiny, fragile family, Ilara saw not a criminal, but a protector. He was the reason for Anna's secrecy, the reason for the hunger in her eyes. They were his siblings. He was their shield against a world that had judged and discarded him. He turned then, his gaze sweeping the area, and his eyes met Ilara's. They were the color of a stormy sky, and in their depths she saw not guilt, but a profound, bone-deep weariness and a fierce, unyielding pride. He did not call out or make a threat. He simply stood there, a silent sentinel, his presence a clear and sharp question. What was she doing here? Ilara felt a flush of shame, as if she were the intruder, the trespasser on a sacred, private sorrow. She stepped out from the shadow of the trees, her hands held open in a gesture of peace. I followed Anna, she said, her voice softer than she intended. I was worried. Silas's expression didn't change, but a muscle feathered in his jaw. He gave a slight nod, an acknowledgement that cost him something. She's fine, he said. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together, a voice unused to pleasantries. The children? Ilara asked, her gaze flicking toward the cabin. Their mind to worry about, the words were not unkind, but they were a wall, built of pride and pain. Ilara saw the desperate state of the cabin's roof, the cracked leather of his boots, the stark reality of their poverty. She thought of her own vast, empty house, of the food left to spoil. The contrast was a physical blow. The next morning, she rode out again, but this time to the foreman's cottage that had sat empty since her father's passing. She instructed her staff to clean it, to stock the pantry, to fill it with blankets and firewood. That afternoon, she found Silas mending a fence line on the edge of his small property, his movements efficient and strong. She rode up, dismounted, and stood before him. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Kane. He stopped his work, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a worn glove. He waited. The foreman's position at the arrowhead is open, she said, her voice steady. The pay is fair. The cottage comes with it. It's warm. There's food. His eyes, which had been fixed on the wire in his hands, lifted to meet hers. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something, a desperate hope, before it was extinguished by that ever-present pride. I don't take charity, Miss Vance. This isn't charity, she countered, her tone firm but gentle. It's a job. My ranch is struggling. The fences are weak, the wells are running low. I'm told you know this land better than anyone. I need a foreman I can trust to work, not one I can trust to flatter me. I need your skill, not your gratitude. He stared at her for a long, silent moment, weighing her words, searching her face for pity or deceit. He saw neither. He saw only a frank, earnest plea. He looked back at his own small, failing patch of land, then toward the cabin where his brother and sister lived on scraps and hope. The battle within him was plain on his face. Giving in felt like surrender, but for them, it was survival. I'll start in the morning, he said, the words costing him more than a day of hard labor ever could. Silas arrived with the dawn, his two young siblings and Anna in tow, their few belongings bundled in a small cart. He moved his family into the foreman's cottage with a silent efficiency, then appeared at the main barn, ready for work. A quiet tension fell over the other ranch hands. They knew Silas Kane by his reputation only, and their greetings were clipped, their glances wary. Silas seemed not to notice, or perhaps he was simply too accustomed to it. He listened as Ilara outlined the most pressing issues, the northern fence line that was constantly being broken, the sputtering pump on the western well. He asked few questions, his gaze sharp and assessing as he surveyed the equipment, the land, the men. He spoke only when necessary, his directives clear and concise. There was no wasted motion, no wasted word. He was a man who communicated through action. Ilara found herself watching him. She watched the way he tested a fence post for rot, his large hands surprisingly gentle. She saw how he could calm a skittish horse with a low murmur and a steady touch. He worked with a deep, rhythmic competence that was mesmerizing. There was a loneliness about him that mirrored her own, but his was forged in the fire of public scorn, while hers was born of quiet, private grief. Their days settled into a new rhythm. He would give his report on the porch in the evenings, standing with his hat in his hands, his gaze fixed on the horizon, never on her. He would detail the work completed, the problems encountered, the plans for the next day. The pump on the well is cracked beyond repair. We'll need a new one from town, he might say. Or, found tracks near the northern fence. Not coyote. A man on foot. Ilara would listen, ask a question or two, and thank him. They were the conversations of an employer and her employee, yet beneath the surface, something else was taking root. It was a partnership built in the silences. She began to trust his judgment implicitly. When he said a section of the herd needed to be moved to higher pasture, she agreed without question. When he suggested a new method for rotating grazing fields, she deferred to his expertise. In return, she offered him a quiet, unwavering support that he had not known from anyone outside his family. When one of the older hands made a cutting remark about Silas's past within Ilara's earshot, she had calmly, but firmly, replied, "On this ranch, a man is judged by his work. And Mr. Kane's work is beyond reproach." The words had spread through the ranch like wildfire, a clear signal of her allegiance. From then on, the whispers ceased. One afternoon, a polished black buggy, drawn by two perfectly matched geldings, rolled up the long drive to the Arrowhead Ranch house. A man stepped out, dressed in a fine city suit that looked out of place against the dusty landscape. He was Bartholomew Thorne, the owner of the neighboring Triple T Ranch. He was handsome in a smooth, polished way, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He was the man who had first accused Silas of rustling all those years ago. Ilara met him on the veranda, offering a cool, polite greeting. Thorne had been circling the Arrowhead like a vulture since her father's death, making casual offers to buy her out, couched in sympathetic language about the burden of it all for a woman alone. "Ilara, my dear," he began, his voice like honey laced with venom. "I was just passing by and thought I'd check on how you're faring. This drought is hitting everyone hard. We are managing, Bartholomew," she replied, her tone leaving no room for his false sympathy. As they spoke, Silas rounded the corner of the barn, carrying a broken harness. He stopped dead when he saw Thorne. The color drained from his face, and the easy strength in his posture vanished, replaced by a rigid, defensive tension. His eyes, usually so calm and steady, narrowed into slits of ice. Thorne's smile widened, a predator's grin. "Well, well. Silas Kane. I see you've found a charitable heart to take you in. A long way down from owning your own stock, isn't it?" The cruelty was deliberate, designed to wound. Silas said nothing. His knuckles were white where he gripped the leather harness. He simply stared at Thorne, a look of pure, unadulterated loathing on his face. Ilara stepped forward slightly, placing herself between them. "Mr. Kane is my foreman, Bartholomew," she said, her voice sharp with a protective instinct that surprised even her. "And his work is the only reason the Arrowhead is managing at all." Thorne's gaze flickered between them, a speculative, ugly light in his eyes. "Is that so? Well, you have to be careful who you trust in this country, Ilara. Some stains never wash out." He tipped his hat, climbed back into his buggy, and was gone, leaving a trail of dust and a thick, poisonous silence in his wake. Silas stood frozen for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the barn without a word, the rigid set of his shoulders speaking volumes. That night, the air itself seemed tense, charged with the memory of the confrontation. The quiet understanding between Ilara and Silas felt fractured, the unspoken history between Silas and Thorne now a palpable presence. The drought worsened. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the earth into a cracked, barren canvas. The western well, which Silas had warned her about, finally gave out completely, its pump groaning one last time before falling silent. The cattle grew thin, their lowing a constant, mournful sound. Hope, like the water table, was sinking to a dangerously low level. It was a crisis that demanded all hands, all hours. Ilara worked alongside her men, her hands, once soft, becoming calloused and capable. She learned to ride fence lines, to spot a sick calf, to live and breathe the harsh realities of the land. And through it all, Silas was there, a steady, unshakable presence. He worked twice as hard as any other man, his energy seeming to come from some deep, inexhaustible well of sheer will. He devised a system for hauling water from the river miles away, a back-breaking, desperate measure, but it kept the herd alive. One evening, exhausted and covered in dust, they stood by the silent well as the sun bled across the horizon. For the first time, the silence between them was not one of caution, but of shared exhaustion, of a battle fought side by side. "My father always said this well was the heart of the ranch," Ilara said, her voice quiet. "He said as long as it pumped, the arrowhead would live. Wells can be dug deeper," Silas replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "Hearts can be mended." It was the most personal thing he had ever said to her. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw past the stoic foreman to the man beneath. She saw the lines of worry etched around his eyes, the deep ache of responsibility he carried not just for his own family, but now for hers, for the ranch. He met her gaze, and in that shared look, a barrier crumbled. A tentative trust, cultivated in shared labor and silent respect, began to blossom into something more profound. Later that week, Anna sought Ilara out in the main house. The girl's shyness had slowly given way to a gentle affection. "Silas, he doesn't talk about it," Anna began, twisting the hem of her apron. "About Mr. Thorne. But it was Thorne who ruined our father. He pushed him into a bad land deal, took everything." The rustling charge against Silas, it came right after our father threatened to expose him. It was a lie to silence us. The words hung in the air, confirming the dark suspicions Ilara already held. The fight for the arrowhead wasn't just about water and land, it was about an older, deeper injustice. A few nights later, unable to sleep, Ilara found herself in her father's study, a room she had mostly avoided. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and tobacco, a phantom presence of the man she missed so dearly. Drawn by an impulse she didn't understand, she ran her hand along the shelf of his worn ledgers. She pulled one down, a thick, heavy book from the year before he died. The pages were filled with his familiar, sprawling script, records of cattle sales, feed costs, wages. But tucked into the back, on pages that were stuck together, she found something else. It was a different kind of record. Coded entries, dates, and sums of money next to a single initial, T, and next to one entry, a hastily scrawled note: "Thorne's water rights claim on Stone Creek is fraudulent. He buried the surveyor's marker." Blackmail. Ilara's blood ran cold. Stone Creek was the small stream that ran through the hollow, the very one that supplied Silas's family cabin with its water. Thorne wasn't just a bully, he was a thief and a blackmailer. Her father had known. Had he confronted Thorne? Was that why his death, officially ruled an accident from a fall, had always felt so wrong? Armed with this terrifying new knowledge, she went to find Silas. He was in the barn, oiling a saddle, his movements methodical in the lantern light. She laid the open ledger on a hay bale before him. "I found this," she said softly. He looked down, his eyes scanning the page. He read the entry about the fraudulent claim, then read it again. The stoic mask he wore so well finally cracked, revealing the raw anger and pain beneath. "He's trying to do to you what he did to my family," Ilara whispered, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "He's trying to squeeze you out, to take your water, to leave you with nothing." Silas looked up from the book, his gaze meeting hers. The last wall between them fell away. He didn't need to confirm it. She could see the whole ugly truth in his eyes. "When my father died," Silas said, his voice thick with a memory he had carried alone for too long, "Thorne came to our ranch. He offered to buy us out for pennies on the dollar. When my father refused, Thorne swore he'd ruin him. A month later, the rustling charge was filed against me. My father spent his last dollar on a lawyer. The stress, it took him. Thorne got the land." The story was stark and brutal. It was a story of greed, of power, and of a lie that had stolen a family's future and a young man's name. "He won't do it again," Elara said, her voice filled with a steel she didn't know she possessed. Not to you. Not to us. The very next day, the threat became reality. One of the ranch hands rode in at a full gallop, his face pale. It's Thorn. He's at the hollow with a half-dozen men. They've got wagons, shovels. They're building a dam across Stone Creek. Silas's face became a thundercloud. This was it. Thorn was making his move, trying to steal the only water source on the Kane property, effectively choking them out. Without a word, Silas turned and strode towards his horse. His intention was clear. He was going to face them, to protect his family's last foothold in the world, and he was going alone. No, Elara said, grabbing his arm. Her touch was firm. You are not facing him by yourself. He looked down at her hand, then into her eyes. He saw not an order from his employer, but a plea from his partner. This is my fight, Elara. It stopped being just your fight when he stepped onto my porch, she countered fiercely. It stopped being just your fight when I read my father's ledger. He is trying to destroy my ranch and your family. This is our fight. She turned to the stunned ranch hands who had gathered. Saddle up, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority no one had ever heard from her before. We ride with our foreman. A murmur of assent went through the men. Their loyalty, once given grudgingly to Silas, was now absolute, cemented by Elara's unwavering stand. They were no longer just her employees, they were her men, and Silas was one of them. They rode hard, a small but determined posse, with Elara and Silas at their head. As they crested the rise overlooking the hollow, they saw the scene below. Thorn was there, directing his hired men as they threw rocks and earth into the narrow creek bed. He looked smug, triumphant. He saw them coming and a smirk crossed his face, assuming it was only Silas, coming to make a futile, lonely protest. But then he saw Elara riding beside him. He saw the grim-faced arrowhead riders fanning out behind her. The smirk faltered. This was not the confrontation he had planned. Silas spurred his horse forward, stopping a stone's throw from the dam. This is my land, Thorn. Get off it. Thorn laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the rocks. This land is worthless without water, Kane. And this water is now mine. I have a claim filed and everything. He waved a piece of paper dismissively. Your father knew that claim was fraudulent, Elara called out, her voice clear and strong. She urged her horse forward to stand beside Silas, presenting a united front. Thorn's eyes narrowed at her. Your father was a sentimental old fool. He should have taken my offers when he had the chance. Do you mean before you blackmailed him? Elara shot back. Before you threatened to expose his so-called debt to you. I found his ledger, Bartholomew. I found the entry about your false water rights claim. A flicker of panic crossed Thorn's face, quickly masked by bluster. That's a lie. You have no proof, don't I? Elara held his gaze. And I imagine the county sheriff would be very interested to hear about the surveyor's marker you buried to create that claim. My father wrote it all down. At that moment, two more riders appeared over the rise. It was the sheriff and his deputy, who one of Elara's men had secretly ridden to fetch before they left. The sheriff, a grizzled man with an honest face, surveyed the scene, Thorn's men illegally damming the creek, the paper in Thorn's hand, the determined set of Elara's jaw. Thorn, the sheriff said, his voice a low growl. Looks like we have some things to discuss. Starting with a complaint of blackmail filed by the late Mr. Vance, and now a new one for illegal diversion of water. Thorn's face went white. His hired men, sensing the tide had turned, dropped their shovels and began to back away. He was alone. His power, built on lies and intimidation, evaporated under the bright, honest sun. The law had finally caught up with him. As the sheriff led a sputtering, defeated Thorn away, a profound quiet settled over the hollow. The Arrowhead men began to dismantle the crude dam, stone by stone, letting the clear water of Stone Creek run free once more. Silas walked to the edge of the creek and watched the water flow. The weight of years of injustice, of carrying a burden that was never his to bear, finally lifted from his shoulders. He turned to Elara, who had dismounted and was standing nearby. There were no words to express the gratitude, the relief, the dawning of a new future in his eyes. He simply reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm and strong, a silent promise. Her hand fit in his as if it were made to be there. In front of his men, his family, and the whole world, Silas Kane's name was cleared, and in the same moment, his heart was finally claimed. A year passed. The spring rains came, and then a summer of gentle, steady sun. The water from Stone Creek, now properly channeled with Silas's expert guidance, helped irrigate the parched fields of the Arrowhead. The land healed, turning from brown to a lush, vibrant green. The ranch, once teetering on the brink of collapse, was now thriving, more prosperous than it had ever been under Elara's father. But the greatest change was not in the land, but in the people who lived on it. The foreman's cottage was empty now. Silas, Anna, and the children lived in the main ranch house, its halls no longer silent and empty, but filled with the sounds of laughter and life. The grand dining table, once set for one, was now crowded every evening. Anna, no longer a timid housekeeper, was blossoming, her education being personally funded by Elara. The two young boys, once solemn and hungry, were now rambunctious and well-fed, their world expanded to the vast playground of the ranch. And Elara Vance was now Elara Kane. She and Silas had been married in the autumn, in a simple ceremony under the great cottonwood tree by the creek, the place where their new life had truly begun. Theirs was not a love of grand declarations or flowery poems. It was a love forged in shared hardship, built on a foundation of mutual respect, and expressed in the quiet, daily rhythm of their lives together. It was in the way he would bring her a cup of coffee in the morning, just as the sun was rising. It was in the way she would wait for him on the porch at the end of the day, her presence a silent welcome home. One warm evening, they stood on that same porch, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in hues of orange and deep violet. Silas's arm was draped comfortably around her shoulders. He was no longer the wounded, isolated man she had first met. The watchfulness in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, steady peace. And Elara, once a lonely heiress rattling around in an empty house, had found her home not in the land or the wealth, but in the family she had built. "Do you remember the first day I came here?" Silas asked, his voice a low, content rumble. "I thought you were offering me charity." Elara leaned her head against his shoulder. "And what do you think now?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the sprawling, prosperous land that was theirs. He looked at the lights of the house, where their family was safe and warm. He looked down at the woman beside him, the woman who had seen past the lies and trusted the man beneath. "I think," he said, turning to kiss her forehead, "that you offered me everything." Together, they watched the stars begin to appear in the vast, darkening sky, two solitary souls who had found in each other a shared constellation, a map to a future brighter than they had ever dared to imagine.